I was sold on a Tuesday morning, between my father's third glass of brandy and my mother's silence. And I remember thinking that even the rain outside seemed to weep for the girl I would never be again. They told me he was 90 years old and dying. The words had fallen from my father's lips like stones dropping into still water, each one sending ripples through the fragile peace of our drawing room. Lord Geoffrey Hartley, Baron of Milford, a man who had once commanded respect in every salon from London to Bath, now sat before me with his cravat loosened and his eyes refusing to meet mine. The afternoon light filtered through our faded curtains, illuminating the dust that danced in the air, the threadbare patches on the upholstery that we had long stopped pretending not to notice. "You will marry the Duke of Rendale," he said, and his voice carried none of the authority it once held. "The contracts have been signed." I stood by the window, watching the rain trace its melancholy patterns down the glass, and I felt something inside me grow very still. The Duke of Rendale. Even the name carried weight, legend, a kind of terrible mythology that had been whispered in drawing rooms for as long as I could remember. No one had seen him in over a decade. Some said he was disfigured by illness. Others claimed he had gone mad, locked away in his sprawling estate in the northern moors, attended only by servants who were paid handsomely for their silence. "He is dying, Vivian," my mother added from her place by the cold fireplace. We could not afford coal that month. Her voice was softer than my father's, but no less final. "He needs a wife to care for him in his final months, and in return, he will clear our debts and secure our family's future." I turned to face them then, these two people who had given me life, who had taught me to read poetry and dance the waltz and believe in the goodness of the world. My mother, Lady Constance Hartley, sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture as perfect as ever, despite the gray that now streaked her once golden hair. She had been beautiful once, celebrated in her youth, courted by men far wealthier than my father. She had chosen love over fortune, and look where it had brought her. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My father finally looked at me. There was something broken in his gaze, something that told me he had already grieved for me, had already buried the daughter he knew and made peace with the transaction he was about to complete. "Then we lose everything," he said. "The estate, the name. Your mother will have nothing. I will have nothing. We will be turned out into the streets like common beggars, and every door in England will be closed to us." The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. I thought of the life I had imagined for myself. The suitors who had once called upon me before our fortune turned, young men with kind eyes and gentle hands who spoke of summers in the countryside, and children playing in sunlit gardens. I thought of Edmund Graves, the vicar's son, who had kissed my hand once beneath a willow tree and told me I had a smile that could light the darkest room. He had stopped calling months ago, when the rumors of our ruin began to spread. I could not blame him. Love, I was learning, was a luxury that only the wealthy could afford. "When is the wedding?" I asked. My mother's eyes glistened with tears she would not shed. "In 3 weeks," she whispered. "He has sent a carriage. It will take you to his estate, where you will be wed in his private chapel." 3 weeks. 21 days to mourn the life I would never live. 21 days to prepare myself for a husband I had never met. A man old enough to be my great-grandfather. A man who was already standing at death's door. I would be a nursemaid, I realized. A caretaker. I would spend my youth in a darkened sick room, tending to a stranger's decay. And when he finally died, I would be free but forever marked. The young widow of the mad Duke of Rendale. No respectable man would have me then. But my family would survive. My mother would not starve. My father, for all his failures, would not die in debtor's prison. I looked out the window again, at the rain that continued to fall, at the garden that had once been my mother's pride, and was now overgrown with weeds. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. "Very well," I said, and my voice did not tremble, though my heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. "I will marry him." My mother rose and crossed the room to embrace me. She smelled of lavender and sorrow, and her arms around me were thin, far thinner than they had been even a year ago. I knew she had been skipping meals, giving her portions to my father and me, pretending she was not hungry when her body was slowly consuming itself. "You are saving us," she whispered against my hair. "You are saving us all." I said nothing. I simply held her and let the rain speak for me. Let it weep the tears I would not allow myself to shed. I was 4 and 20 years old enough to understand that sacrifice was not always noble, that sometimes it was simply necessary. My father had gambled away our fortune on failed investments and poor decisions. My mother had stood by him through it all, loyal to a fault, refusing to abandon the man she loved, even as he led them both to ruin. And now it fell to me to rescue them from the consequences of choices I had never made. The carriage arrived exactly 3 weeks later, on a morning so gray and heavy that it seemed the sky itself was in mourning. I had spent those final days saying goodbye to the only world I had ever known. I walked through the gardens one last time, touching the roses my mother had planted when I was still a girl learning to walk. I sat in my bedroom and read through the letters Edmund Graves had written me before our courtship ended, before poverty had made me untouchable. I burned them all in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken, watching his words of affection turn to ash. I did not cry. I had made a decision, somewhere in the depths of my grief, that I would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not my parents, who had sold me, not the servants, who whispered when they thought I could not hear. And certainly not the Duke of Rendale, whoever he truly was, whatever monster or madman awaited me at the end of this journey. The carriage was black and gleaming, pulled by 4 horses as dark as midnight. A footman in immaculate livery helped me inside, and I was struck immediately by the luxury of the interior. Velvet cushions, silk curtains, a small compartment stocked with chocolates and wine. Whatever else could be said of my future husband, he was not lacking in wealth. My mother embraced me one final time on the steps of our crumbling manor. "Be strong, my darling," she said, and there were tears streaming down her face now, tears she could no longer contain. "Remember who you are. Remember that you are a Hartley, and Hartley women do not bend. They do not break." I kissed her cheek and climbed into the carriage without looking back. If I had looked back, I would have lost my courage entirely. I would have thrown open the door and run to her arms and begged her to find another way, any other way. But there was no other way. There was only this: a black carriage carrying me north, toward a husband I had never seen, toward a future I could not imagine. The journey took 4 days. 4 days of watching the landscape change outside my window, of green fields giving way to rolling moors, of quaint villages growing fewer and farther between until there was nothing but wilderness stretching in every direction. The weather grew colder as we traveled north, and I wrapped myself in the fur blanket provided, watching my breath fog in the air. I thought about what I knew of the Duke of Rendale, which was precious little. His family, the Vanes, had been one of the oldest and wealthiest in England for centuries. They had served kings and queens, had built their fortune on land and shipping, and, some whispered, ventures less savory. The current duke, whose Christian name I did not even know, had inherited the title 20 years ago upon the death of his father. He had been a young man then, they said, vibrant and handsome, a fixture at every ball and gathering of the ton. And then something had happened. An illness, a scandal, a tragedy. No one knew for certain. He had retreated to his estate in the moors and had never been seen in public again. 20 years of isolation, 20 years of mystery. And now, at 90 years old, he had emerged from his self-imposed exile for one purpose only: to take a wife. Why me? I wondered. Why a baron's daughter with nothing to offer but her youth and her desperation? There were heiresses aplenty who would have accepted such a match, women with fortunes of their own who would have traded their gold for a duchess's coronet. Why had he chosen a nobody? A girl whose family name was now synonymous with failure and debt? I had no answers, and the silence of the carriage offered none. On the evening of the fourth day, we arrived at Wrendale Manor. I had expected something grand, but I was not prepared for the sheer scale of what rose before me. The manor was enormous, a sprawling edifice of gray stone that seemed to grow from the very moors themselves. Towers reached toward the darkening sky, their windows glowing with candlelight that flickered like distant stars. The grounds were immaculately maintained despite the wildness that surrounded them, gardens carved out of the heath like civilized islands in a sea of untamed nature. The carriage rolled to a stop before a massive oak door, and the footman helped me down onto the gravel drive. The wind was sharp and cold, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something ancient and earthy that I could not name. I pulled my cloak tighter around my shoulders and looked up at the house that would now be my prison. A woman stood waiting for me in the doorway. She was old, perhaps 70, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and eyes that were startlingly sharp and clear. She wore black silk from throat to toe, and jewels glittered at her ears and throat, diamonds that caught the fading light and scattered it like tears. "Miss Hartley," she said, and her voice was cool, measured, betraying nothing. "I am Philippa Vane, Dowager Duchess of Wrendale. Welcome to your new home." I curtsied as I had been taught. "Your Grace, I am honored to meet you." She studied me for a long moment, her gaze traveling from my face to my worn traveling dress to the single trunk that contained everything I owned in the world. I could not tell if she found me wanting or satisfactory. Her expression gave nothing away. "Come inside," she said finally. "You must be exhausted from your journey. A maid will show you to your rooms. You will meet my grandson tomorrow." Grandson. The word struck me like a physical blow. Grandson. Not son, not nephew, but grandson. Which meant the Duke of Wrendale, the man I was to marry, was even older than I had been told. If this woman was his grandmother and appeared to be in her 70s, then he must be. I stopped myself from calculating. It did not matter. Old was old. Dying was dying. I had made my choice, and I would live with it. "Thank you, Your Grace," I said, and I followed her into the manor. The interior was as grand as the exterior had promised. High ceilings painted with pastoral scenes, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbows across the marble floors, tapestries that must have been centuries old hanging on walls paneled in dark wood. Everywhere I looked, there was beauty and history and wealth beyond anything I had ever known. But there was also something else. A stillness that felt unnatural. A silence that pressed against my ears like cotton. The house was enormous, built to hold dozens of family members and hundreds of servants, yet it felt empty. Abandoned. As if all the life had drained out of it long ago, leaving only this beautiful shell behind. The maid who led me to my rooms was young and pretty, with red hair and freckles scattered across her nose. Her name was Ruth, she told me, and she had been assigned to attend me for as long as I was at Wrendale. For as long as I was at Wrendale. Not forever. Not for the rest of my life. The implication was clear. They did not expect this arrangement to last. My rooms were in the East Wing, a suite of chambers that would have swallowed our entire manor house back home. There was a sitting room with a fireplace already crackling with warmth, a bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed draped in blue velvet, a dressing room lined with wardrobes that stood empty, waiting to be filled with gowns I did not own. "The Dowager Duchess has arranged for a modiste to visit tomorrow," Ruth said, as if reading my thoughts. "You will need a new wardrobe. The wedding is in 2 days." 2 days. I had thought I would have more time. Time to adjust, to prepare, to steel myself for what was to come. But 2 days. 48 hours until I would stand before God and pledge myself to a stranger. What is he like? I asked Ruth, unable to stop myself. The Duke. What manner of man is he? Ruth's face went carefully blank. I am sure I could not say, Miss. I have never met him. Never met him. She had worked in this house, and she had never met the master of it. What kind of man hid himself so thoroughly from even his own servants? I dismissed her with thanks, and stood alone in my beautiful, empty rooms. Outside the window, the moors stretched into darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the rising moon. I did not sleep that night. The next day passed in a blur of silk and lace, and the sharp voices of seamstresses who measured and pinned and tutted over the sorry state of my existing wardrobe. Gowns arrived as if by magic. Day dresses and evening gowns, and a wedding dress of ivory satin that must have cost more than my father's annual income. I stood still and let them drape me in finery, a doll being dressed for display, and I thought about the man I would marry tomorrow. I still did not know his name. No one would tell me. The servants referred to him only as His Grace, or the Duke. The Dowager Duchess, when she joined me for tea that afternoon, spoke of him not at all. She asked about my family, my education, my accomplishments, and she nodded at my answers with an expression that remained utterly unreadable. You are not what I expected, she said finally, setting down her teacup with a delicate clink. I was not certain whether to take that as compliment or criticism. What did you expect, Your Grace? Someone more. Resigned, she said. You have fire in your eyes, Miss Hartley. That is good. You will need it. Before I could ask what she meant, she rose and swept from the room, leaving me alone with my confusion and my fear. The wedding was held at sunset, in a chapel that sat at the far end of the estate. I walked the path alone, my ivory gown trailing behind me in the evening mist, a bouquet of white roses clutched in my trembling hands. There were no guests, no music, no celebration. Just the ancient stone chapel rising before me, its stained glass windows glowing with the light of 100 candles, and the knowledge that my life was about to change forever. The Dowager Duchess waited at the door. She wore black, as she had the day before, and her face was set in lines of grim determination. Are you ready? She asked. No, I thought. I will never be ready. Yes, I said. She took my arm and led me inside. The chapel was small but beautiful, its walls lined with monuments to generations of Vanes who had lived and died and been forgotten. The altar stood at the far end, illuminated by candelabras that cast dancing shadows across the stone floor. A priest waited there, his Bible open, his expression solemn. And beside him stood a figure. He was hunched, wrapped in layers of dark fabric that obscured his form entirely. A hood covered his head, and beneath it, I could see the gleam of a mask, black silk that hid his face from view. He leaned heavily on a cane, and even from this distance, I could hear the rasp of his breathing, labored and painful. 90 years old and dying. That was what they had told me. And looking at this broken figure, I believed it. I forced myself to walk forward, one step at a time, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone in the chapel could hear it. This was my fate. This was my future. This ancient, decrepit man who could barely stand, who hid his face from the world, who had bought me like livestock at market. I would not cry. I would not break. I was a Hartley, and Hartley women endured. I reached the altar and turned to face my groom. The priest began to speak, words about holy matrimony and sacred vows and the joining of two souls before God. I barely heard them. My entire being was focused on the figure beside me, on the ragged sound of his breathing, on the trembling of his gloved hands as they gripped the cane. I wondered what he looked like beneath the mask. I wondered if he was as afraid as I was. The priest asked me if I would take this man to be my husband, and I heard my own voice answer, "I will." The priest asked the Duke the same question, and there was a long, terrible pause. Then the Duke straightened. It happened so suddenly that I gasped. One moment he was hunched and trembling. The next he was standing tall, his shoulders square, his spine straight. The cane clattered to the floor, forgotten. His gloved hands rose to his face, and in one swift motion he tore away the mask. I forgot how to breathe. The man standing before me was not 90 years old. He was not ancient. He was not dying. He was young. He was young and tall and devastatingly, impossibly beautiful. Dark hair fell across a forehead that was smooth and unlined. Eyes the color of a winter sky, pale gray and piercing, met mine with an intensity that sent electricity crackling down my spine. His jaw was sharp, his cheekbones high. His lips curved in an expression that might have been amusement or challenge or something else entirely. He could not have been more than 25. "My name," he said, and his voice was nothing like the aged wheeze I had expected. It was deep and rich and carried an authority that filled the entire chapel. "My name is Nathaniel Vane, Duke of Rendale, and you, Miss Hartley, have just agreed to be my wife." The world tilted beneath my feet. "I do not understand," I whispered, though even as I said it, understanding was beginning to dawn. The deception, the elaborate ruse, the mask, the hunched posture, the rumors of illness and age. It had all been a lie. But why? Why would a young, wealthy duke pretend to be a dying old man? Why would he trick a stranger into marriage? "You do not need to understand," he said. "You only need to fulfill your end of the bargain." The priest was staring at us both, his face pale with shock. Clearly, he had not been privy to this deception. The Dowager Duchess, however, watched from her pew with an expression of grim satisfaction, as if everything was proceeding exactly as planned. I looked back at Nathaniel Vane, at this beautiful stranger who had lied to me, who had manipulated me, who had made a fool of me from the very beginning. Rage ignited in my chest, hot and bright, burning away the fear and confusion that had paralyzed me moments before. "You deceived me," I said, and my voice was steady now, cold as the stone walls that surrounded us. "I did," he agreed, without an ounce of remorse. "Why?" "Because I needed a wife." His eyes never left mine, and I needed one who would ask no questions, who would have no connections to the life I have left behind, who would be grateful enough for the arrangement that she would not look too closely at its terms. "You needed a pawn," I said. "Yes." The word hung between us, brutal in its honesty. I should have refused. I should have torn off my veil and walked out of that chapel and damned the consequences. My pride screamed at me to do exactly that, to show this arrogant man that I was not a piece on his chessboard, that I could not be bought and manipulated and discarded at will. But then I thought of my mother, I thought of my father, I thought of the debts that would swallow them whole if I walked away now. And I realized, with a bitterness that tasted like ash, that I had no choice. I had never had a choice. I had simply been too naive to understand it. "Finish the ceremony," I said to the priest, and my voice did not waver. "I have made a vow, and I will keep it." Something flickered in Nathaniel Vane's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or respect. Or something else I could not name. The priest stumbled through the rest of the service, and when he pronounced us man and wife, Nathaniel did not kiss me. He simply took my hand, his grip firm and warm even through his gloves, and led me out of the chapel and into the night. I was married. I was married to a liar, to a stranger, to a man who had bought me for reasons I did not understand and did not care to explain. And as we walked back to the manor in silence, the mist swirling around us like ghosts, I made a vow of my own. I would discover the truth. I would find out why Nathaniel Vane had gone to such elaborate lengths to deceive me. And then I would make him regret it. The first weeks of my marriage were an exercise in frustration. Nathaniel Vane was a ghost in his own house. He appeared at meals occasionally, sitting at the far end of a dining table long enough to seat 30, exchanging no more than a handful of words with me before disappearing back into whatever shadows he had emerged from. He slept in the West Wing, as far from my chambers as it was possible to be while still remaining under the same roof. We were husband and wife in name only, strangers who happened to share a surname and a sprawling prison of stone. I tried to speak with him. In those early days, before bitterness had fully crystallized in my heart, I sought him out. I knocked on the door of his study. I waited for him in the library. I even attempted to intercept him during his solitary walks across the moors. Each time, he deflected me with cold politeness, answering my questions with non-answers, redirecting conversations with the skill of a politician. "Why did you need a wife?" I asked him once, catching him in the hallway after dinner. "For appearances," he said, not slowing his stride. "Appearances for whom?" I demanded, hurrying to keep pace with his long legs. "You have not left this estate in a decade. You receive no visitors. No one even knows you are alive, let alone married." He stopped then, turning to face me so suddenly that I nearly collided with him. His gray eyes were unreadable in the dim light of the corridor. "There are things you do not understand, Miss Hartley," he said. "It is Mrs. Vane now," I corrected him, with more venom than I intended. "Or have you forgotten that you forced me into this marriage under false pretenses? I forced you into nothing. You agreed of your own free will. I agreed to marry a dying old man, not a... I could not finish the sentence. Not a young, vital, infuriatingly handsome man who made my pulse race every time he entered a room. Not a man whose presence I felt like a physical weight, whose voice haunted my dreams, whose rare smiles made something flutter in my chest despite my anger. "Not a what?" he asked, and there was something dangerous in his tone now, something that made me take an involuntary step backward. "Not a liar," I said, recovering my composure. "Not a man who hides in shadows and speaks in riddles and treats his wife like an unwelcome guest in her own home." For a long moment, he simply looked at me. I could not tell what he was thinking. His face was a mask, as effective as the silk one he had worn at our wedding. "You are right," he said finally. "I have not been fair to you. But fairness is a luxury I cannot afford. Not now. Perhaps not ever." He turned and walked away, and I was left standing alone in the darkened hallway, more confused than ever. I found unlikely allies in that house of secrets. Ruth, my maid, proved to be more observant than she initially appeared. She had worked at Wrendale for 3 years, she told me, hired by the Dowager Duchess after the last round of servants had been dismissed. She knew little of the Duke himself, but she knew the rhythms of the house, the comings and goings that most people overlooked. "There is a man who visits sometimes," she told me one morning as she helped me dress. "He comes late at night, always through the servants' entrance. He meets with His Grace in the study, and they talk for hours. Sometimes I hear raised voices." "What man?" I asked. "What does he look like?" Ruth shook her head. "I have never seen his face clearly. He wears a hat pulled low, and he leaves before dawn. But he has been coming for years, miss, long before you arrived. A secret visitor, late-night meetings, raised voices." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to accumulate, but I still could not see how they fit together. The Dowager Duchess proved to be a more complex figure than I had initially assumed. She was cold, yes, and guarded, but there were moments when I caught her watching me with something that might have been approval. She invited me to take tea with her each afternoon, and slowly, carefully, she began to share fragments of the family history. "The Vanes have always been cursed," she told me one gray afternoon, her gaze fixed on the rain streaming down the windows. We rise high, and then we fall. It is the way of things. What happened to Nathaniel? I asked, seizing the opportunity. Why did he disappear from society? Why did he pretend to be dying? Her expression shuddered immediately. That is not my story to tell. Then whose story is it? I pressed. His, she said simply. If he chooses to share it with you, he will. If not, you must learn to live with the silence. I did not want to learn to live with the silence. I wanted answers. I wanted the truth. I wanted to understand the man I had married, this beautiful enigma who looked at me sometimes as if I were a problem he could not solve, as if my very presence in his life was both unexpected and unwelcome. But the truth, I was learning, did not come easily at Wrendale. The first crack appeared on a night in late autumn, when the wind howled across the moors and the house creaked and groaned like a living thing. I could not sleep. This was not unusual. I had slept poorly since my arrival, plagued by strange dreams and stranger waking thoughts. But that night, the restlessness was worse than usual. I rose from my bed, wrapped myself in a shawl, and decided to go to the library in search of a book that might quiet my racing mind. The corridors were dark, lit only by the occasional candle left burning in a sconce. I made my way through the maze of hallways, my bare feet silent on the cold stone floors. I had lived here for 2 months now, long enough to learn the layout of the main house, though there were still wings I had never explored, rooms that remained locked and forbidden. I was passing the door to Nathaniel's study when I heard the voices. They were muffled, indistinct, but unmistakably angry. I stopped, pressing myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see the flicker of firelight and the shadows of 2 figures moving within. You cannot keep hiding forever. The voice was unfamiliar, male, sharp with frustration. Sooner or later, you will have to face what you have done. I have faced it. Nathaniel's voice, colder than I had ever heard it. I face it every day. You face nothing. You hide in this mausoleum playing dead while the rest of us deal with the consequences. Do you know what people are saying? They think you murdered him, Nathaniel. They think you killed your own cousin and fled like a coward. My blood turned to ice. I did not kill Marcus, Nathaniel said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something broken. You know I did not kill him. He was trying to kill me. Then come back, the other man urged. Tell your side of the story. Clear your name. And put everyone I care about in danger. Nathaniel's laugh was bitter, hollow. Marcus may be dead, but his father is not. And Lord Ashworth will stop at nothing to see me destroyed. He has spent the last 10 years building his case, poisoning every ear in London against me. If I show my face, if I give him any ammunition at all, he will use it. He will ruin the Vane name entirely. He will take everything. So you hide, the other man said. You take a wife under false pretenses. You play this ridiculous charade of the dying Duke, and you hide. I had to protect her. The words were so soft I almost missed them. I had to protect her, Nathaniel repeated. If Ashworth knew I was alive, if he knew I had married, he would come for her. He would use her against me. I could not. I could not bear to have another death on my conscience. Another death. The silence that followed was deafening. She is not Cecilia, the other man said gently. You cannot save her by keeping her in the dark. I know she is not Cecilia, Nathaniel snapped. I know that. But I will not make the same mistake twice. I will not let someone else die because of my foolishness. Footsteps approached the door, and I barely had time to press myself into the shadows before it swung open. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face I did not recognize. He strode down the corridor without looking back, his boots echoing against the stone. I waited until the sound faded, then slipped away to my chambers, my mind reeling. Murder. A dead cousin. A powerful enemy named Ashworth. A woman named Cecilia who had died because of Nathaniel's foolishness. The pieces were finally beginning to come together, and the picture they formed was darker than anything I had imagined. I began my investigation the next morning. I was careful, methodical, aware that I was treading on dangerous ground. I asked subtle questions of the servants framed as idle curiosity. I searched the library for any mention of the Vane family history, any record of scandals or tragedies that might explain what I had overheard. I even wrote to a distant cousin in London, asking her to send me any gossip she might have heard about the Duke of Rendale or the Ashworth family. The answers came slowly, in fragments and whispers, but they came. Marcus Ashworth had been Nathaniel's cousin, the son of his mother's sister. The two had been close as boys, raised together after Nathaniel's parents died in a carriage accident when he was just 12 years old. Marcus had been charming, charismatic, beloved by society. But beneath the polished exterior, there had been something rotten. He was jealous, Ruth told me one evening, her voice low. Everyone knew it, though no one spoke of it. The Duke inherited everything, the title, the fortune, the estates. Master Marcus got nothing. His father was only a baron, and a poor one at that. He spent his whole life in his Grace's shadow. And Cecilia, I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Who was she? Ruth's face went pale. Where did you hear that name, miss? It does not matter. Who was she? She was. Ruth hesitated, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. She was the Duke's betrothed. Before. They were to be married 10 years ago. But she died. How did she die? Ruth shook her head. I do not know the details. No one does. But after she died, the Duke disappeared. He came here to Rendale, and he never left. I thanked her and dismissed her, my thoughts churning. Cecilia, Nathaniel's betrothed. Dead 10 years ago, around the same time he had retreated from the world. And Marcus, his cousin, also dead, killed in circumstances that had led people to believe Nathaniel was a murderer. The connection was obvious. Marcus had done something to Cecilia, something that had led to her death. Nathaniel had discovered the truth, and in the confrontation that followed, Marcus had died. But that was only speculation. I needed proof. The proof came in the form of a letter. I found it quite by accident, tucked into a book in the library that I had pulled from the shelf in search of distraction. It was old, the paper yellowed and brittle, and it was addressed to Nathaniel in a woman's delicate hand. My dearest Nathaniel, it began, and my heart clenched at the intimacy of those words. I write to you with a heavy heart, for I have discovered something terrible. Marcus came to see me last night, while you were away in London. He made advances, my love. He told me that if I did not submit to him, he would tell your grandmother lies about my family, lies that would force her to break our engagement. I refused him. Of course, I would never betray you. But I am frightened, Nathaniel. There is something in his eyes, something cold and cruel, that makes me fear what he might do next. Please come home. Please protect me. I do not know how much longer I can bear this alone. Forever yours, Cecilia. The letter was dated 3 days before her death. I sat in the library for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands, piecing together the tragedy that had shaped Nathaniel Vane into the man he was today. Cecilia had been threatened by Marcus. She had written to Nathaniel for help. But somehow, before Nathaniel could reach her, she had died. And Nathaniel had blamed himself, had carried that guilt for a decade, had hidden away from the world because he could not bear to face the consequences of his failure to protect the woman he loved. And then Marcus had died too, in a confrontation that was almost certainly self-defense, but had been twisted by Marcus's father, Lord Ashworth, into a narrative of cold-blooded murder. No wonder Nathaniel had hidden behind a mask. No wonder he had created the fiction of a dying old duke. He was not hiding from society. He was hiding from a man who wanted to destroy him. I replaced the letter carefully in its hiding place and went in search of my husband. I found him in the garden, of all places. It was a cold afternoon, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened snow. I had not expected to find anyone outside, but there he was, standing among the bare rose bushes, his coat pulled tight against the wind. He looked younger like this, less guarded, almost vulnerable. "I know about Cecilia," I said. He went very still. "I know about Marcus. I know about Lord Ashworth and his accusations. I know why you hide." For a long moment he said nothing. The wind howled around us, tugging at my skirts, numbing my fingers through my thin gloves. I waited, refusing to be the one to break the silence. "How?" he asked finally. "How did you find out?" I listened at doors. I asked questions. I found her letter to you, the one she wrote before she died. He closed his eyes. "Of course you did. You are far more clever than I gave you credit for." "Did you kill Marcus?" I asked, needing to hear him say it. "No." He opened his eyes, and in their gray depths, I saw a decade of pain. "I wanted to. God knows I wanted to." He killed Cecilia as surely as if he had held a knife to her throat. He tormented her, threatened her, and when she still refused to yield to him, he pushed her from the cliffs behind his father's estate and told everyone it was an accident, a fall, a tragedy. My stomach turned. "And no one believed you when you told the truth." I was the jilted lover, the grieving fiancé who could not accept that his betrothed had taken her own life. His smile was bitter. That was the story Ashworth spread, that Cecilia had thrown herself from those cliffs because she could not bear to marry me. That I had driven her to despair with my demands, my possessiveness, my cruelty. But that was not true. No, it was not true. Cecilia loved me. She would never have. He stopped, his voice breaking. "It does not matter. The truth does not matter when lies are more convenient." "So you confronted Marcus," I said, filling in the gaps. "I confronted him at his father's house. I accused him of murder, demanded that he confess. He laughed at me. He said no one would believe me, that I was a fool to even try. And then he attacked me. He had a knife, hidden in his coat. If I had not been faster, stronger, I would be the one in the ground, not him." "Self-defense," I said. "Self-defense," he agreed. But Lord Ashworth arrived before I could explain. He found his son dead at my feet, a knife in his chest, and he declared me a murderer. He used all his influence, all his connections, to turn society against me. I had no choice but to disappear. The snow began to fall then, soft and silent, blanketing the world in white. Nathaniel stood motionless, snowflakes catching in his dark hair, and I felt something shift in my chest, some wall that I had built around my heart beginning to crumble. "Why did you marry me?" I asked. "The real reason." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Because Ashworth has not given up. He has spent the last decade searching for proof that I am still alive, that I did not die of the illness everyone believes claimed me. He wants to drag me before a court, to see me hanged for murder. And I needed—" He hesitated. "I needed someone who would not be connected to my past, someone who would not know enough to reveal my secrets, someone who could be the Duchess of Rendale without asking questions." "A pawn," I said, echoing our earlier conversation. "Yes, a pawn." He stepped closer, and I felt the warmth of him despite the cold air between us. "But I was wrong about you, Vivian. You are not a pawn. You are. You are something else entirely. My name." He had never used my Christian name before. It sounded different on his lips, softer, more intimate. "What am I?" I whispered. He did not answer. Instead, he reached out and touched my face, his gloved fingers brushing a snowflake from my cheek. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpected, that I forgot how to breathe. "I do not know yet," he said, "but I find myself wanting to discover the answer." He left me standing in the snow, my heart pounding, my certainties shattered into 1,000 pieces. I stood there for a long time after he had gone, the cold seeping through my clothes, the snowflakes melting on my upturned face. Something fundamental had shifted within me, a tectonic movement of the heart that I could not name or understand. All I knew was that the anger I had carried since our wedding day had begun to soften around its edges, had begun to transform into something more complicated, more frightening, more real. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in my bed and stared at the canopy above me, replaying every conversation I had had with Nathaniel, searching for clues I might have missed. I thought about his silences, his guardedness, the way he sometimes looked at me when he thought I was not watching. There was longing in those looks, I realize now. Longing and fear and something else, something that made my pulse quicken even in the darkness of my empty room. I thought about Cecilia, the woman he had loved and lost. I wondered if he saw her sometimes when he looked at me. If he was drawn to me because I reminded him of her, or in spite of that resemblance. I wondered if he would ever be able to love someone new, or if his heart had been buried with her in whatever cold ground held her body. The questions had no answers, at least not yet. But I found, to my surprise, that I wanted to discover them. I wanted to understand this man who had deceived me, who had married me under false pretenses, who had opened himself to me in ways that clearly cost him dearly. I wanted to know who he truly was beneath the masks he wore, the one of silk and the one of ice. And I wanted him to know who I truly was as well. The winter months that followed were a study in transformation. Nathaniel did not become a different person overnight. He was still guarded, still prone to long silences and sudden retreats. But something had shifted between us that day in the garden. A door had opened, and neither of us seemed able to close it again. He began joining me for meals, not just occasionally, but every evening. We talked of books and music and philosophy, of my childhood in the countryside and his education at Oxford. I learned that he played the piano, though he claimed to be badly out of practice. I learned that he had a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed, a talent for mimicry that could reduce me to helpless laughter. And slowly, tentatively, he learned about me. He learned that I had once dreamed of traveling, of seeing the cathedrals of Italy and the mountains of Switzerland. He learned that I wrote poetry in secret, verses that I had never shown anyone. He learned that I missed my mother terribly, that I worried about her constantly, that I sent letters every week hoping for reassurance that she was well. "You are not what I expected," he told me one evening, echoing his grandmother's words from so many months ago. "What did you expect?" I asked. Someone who would accept her fate quietly, someone who would be content to play the role I had assigned her. He shook his head. "Instead, I got a woman who refuses to be silent, who investigates my secrets, who demands answers to questions I have never been asked." "Is that a complaint?" I asked, lifting an eyebrow. "No." His voice was soft. "It is an observation. And perhaps an admiration." The first time he kissed me, it was the night of the winter solstice. There was a tradition at Wrendale, the Dowager Duchess had told me, of lighting candles throughout the manor on the longest night of the year. It was meant to symbolize hope, the promise that the darkness would not last forever, that light would eventually return. We had spent the evening placing candles in every window, every corridor, every room that was not locked and forbidden. The house glowed like a beacon in the darkness, and for the first time since my arrival, it felt almost warm, almost welcoming. Nathaniel found me in the library, standing by the window and watching the snow fall. "Happy solstice," he said, and I turned to find him holding 2 glasses of mulled wine. I took one. breathing in the scent of cinnamon and cloves. Happy solstice. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the candle flames flicker in the glass. Then he set down his wine and turned to face me. "I have been thinking," he said. "That sounds dangerous." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "It is. Because I have been thinking about you. About us. About what this marriage could be, if we let it." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I married you for convenience, Vivian. For protection. I did not expect." He hesitated, searching for words. "I did not expect to feel what I feel when I look at you. I did not expect to care whether you were happy or miserable. I did not expect to lie awake at night, imagining what it would be like to." He did not finish the sentence. Instead, he leaned down and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he was giving me the chance to pull away. I did not pull away. Instead, I rose on my toes and kissed him back, my fingers curling into the fabric of his coat, my heart singing with a joy I had not known I was capable of feeling. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. "I should not have done that," he said, though he did not move away. "Probably not," I agreed. "Do you regret it?" I looked up at him, at this man who had deceived me and confused me and infuriated me, at this man who had also protected me, respected me, opened himself to me in ways that clearly terrified him. "No," I said, "I do not regret it at all." He kissed me again, and the candles burned around us, tiny flames holding back the darkness of the longest night. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, as if the winter was unwilling to release its grip on the moors. But change was coming. I could feel it in the air, in the way Nathaniel looked at me across the breakfast table, in the way the Dowager Duchess smiled when she saw us together. Something was shifting, not just in our marriage, but in the world beyond the walls of Rendale. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter. It arrived on a gray morning in March, delivered by a messenger who had ridden through the night. Nathaniel's face went pale when he read it, and he excused himself from the table without a word. I found him in his study an hour later, staring into the fire. "What has happened?" I asked, closing the door behind me. "Ashworth," he said, and the name was a curse on his lips. "He knows." "Knows what?" "That I am alive. That I am married." He turned to face me, and there was fear in his eyes, fear I had never seen before. He has been searching for a decade, and now he has found me. He is coming here, Vivian. He is coming to Rendale. The words hit me like a blow. "When?" I demanded. "I do not know. A week, perhaps. Maybe less. Then we must leave. We must go somewhere he cannot find us. There is nowhere." Nathaniel's voice was flat, defeated. "Ashworth has connections everywhere. If we run, he will follow. If we hide, he will find us. The only way to stop him is to face him." "Then we face him," I said, and I was surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Together." He looked at me as if I had grown a second head. "You do not understand. Ashworth is dangerous. He is ruthless. He will stop at nothing to see me destroyed. I understand perfectly." I crossed the room and took his hands in mine. "I understand that you have been fighting this battle alone for 10 years. I understand that you married me to protect yourself, and perhaps to protect me as well. But I am not a pawn anymore, Nathaniel. I am your wife. And I will not let you face this alone." For a long moment, he simply stared at me. Then something crumbled in his expression, some wall he had been holding up for years, and he pulled me into his arms. "I do not deserve you," he murmured into my hair. "Probably not," I said, and I felt him laugh against me, a broken sound that was half sob. We held each other in the firelight, and I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. The preparations began immediately. Nathaniel sent letters to allies I had not known he possessed. Men and women who had believed in his innocence all along, who had kept his secrets and protected his reputation as best they could. The man I had seen visiting late at night turned out to be his oldest friend, a solicitor named Thomas Blackwell, who had been gathering evidence of Ashworth's crimes for years. The solicitor arrived at Wrendale 3 days after the letter, his arms full of documents and his face grim with determination. "We have enough," he told us, spreading papers across the library table. Witness statements from servants who saw Marcus threaten Miss Cecilia. Records of payments Ashworth made to silence anyone who questioned the official story. Letters Marcus wrote to his father, boasting of what he planned to do. I looked at the evidence, at the proof of a decade's worth of lies and manipulation, and I felt sick. "Why did you not bring this forward before?" I asked. "Because it was not enough," Thomas said. "Ashworth is powerful. He has judges in his pocket, politicians who owe him favors. He would have found a way to dismiss this evidence, to discredit the witnesses, to spin the narrative in his favor. We needed something more." "And now you have it," Nathaniel said. It was not a question. Thomas nodded. "Lord Ashworth has grown arrogant in his certainty that he has won. He has made mistakes, left trails that can be followed. And there are people who are willing to speak now who were too afraid before." His voice hardened. "He has made enemies, Nathaniel. Powerful enemies. They are ready to bring him down, but they need someone to stand with them. They need you to come forward and tell your story." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "And if I do, I put everyone I love in danger." "If you do not," Thomas countered, "Ashworth wins. He destroys you, takes everything your family has built, and goes on to hurt others as he hurt Marcus's victims, as he hurt Cecilia." The silence that followed was thick with tension. I reached over and took Nathaniel's hand. "You are not alone in this," I reminded him. "Whatever you decide, I am with you." He looked at me and I saw the war raging in his eyes, fear against courage, caution against justice, the desire to protect against the need to fight. "Very well," he said finally. "Tell me what I need to do." Lord Ashworth arrived at Wrendale on a day that dawned clear and cold. I watched from the window of my chambers as his carriage rolled up the drive. Black and gleaming, pulled by horses that pranced and snorted in the morning air. He emerged looking exactly as I had imagined, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome once, but had hardened into cruelty. He wore wealth like armor, his clothes immaculate, his bearing imperious. But there was something else beneath the polish. Something hungry. Something desperate. He was met at the door by the Dowager Duchess, who received him with the icy courtesy of a woman who had been waiting for this confrontation for a very long time. "Lord Ashworth," I heard her say as I descended the stairs. "How unexpected. I was not aware we had invited you." "I do not require an invitation," he replied, his voice dripping with contempt. "I am here to see the Duke, the real Duke, not whatever imposter has been living in this house." I reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into view. "There is no imposter here, Lord Ashworth. Only my husband." His eyes found me, and I saw them widen with surprise. "So it is true. The Duke has taken a wife." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "How charming. Tell me, girl, do you know what kind of man you have married? Do you know that he is a murderer?" "I know that he is a victim," I said, keeping my voice steady. "A victim of your lies and your manipulation. A victim of your son's cruelty and your own ambition." The smile vanished from his face. "You know nothing." "I know everything," I countered. "I know what Marcus did to Cecilia. I know that you covered up his crime and blamed an innocent man. I know that you have spent the last decade persecuting my husband for the sin of defending himself against your son's attack." Ashworth's face had gone purple with rage. "How dare you? How dare you speak of my son? He was a good man, a noble man, and your husband butchered him like an animal. Your son was a predator." The voice came from behind me, and I turned to find Nathaniel descending the stairs. He was calm, composed, but there was steel in his eyes that I had never seen before. Your son was a rapist and a murderer, and you have spent your entire life protecting him from the consequences of his actions. But that ends today. Ashworth took a step back, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Fear. You have no proof, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. We have all the proof we need. Nathaniel reached my side and took my hand. Witness statements, financial records, letters in Marcus's own hand describing his crimes. The evidence has been sent to every magistrate in the county, every newspaper in London. By this time tomorrow, the whole world will know the truth. You are bluffing. I never bluff. The silence that followed was electric. Then Ashworth did something I did not expect. He laughed. You think this changes anything, he said, and his voice had gone cold, deadly. You think a few pieces of paper can undo a decade of work. I have powerful friends, Rendale. Friends who will not take kindly to having their names dragged through the mud. This is not over. This will never be over. He turned on his heel and strode toward the door. Lord Ashworth. He stopped. I think you will find, Nathaniel said quietly, that your friends are not as loyal as you believe. I think you will find that when given the choice between supporting a man who shields murderers and protecting their own reputations, they will choose self-preservation every time. I think you will find that you are very, very alone. Ashworth did not turn around. He simply walked out of the manor, climbed into his carriage, and disappeared down the drive. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Is it over? I asked. Nathaniel shook his head. Not yet. But it will be. He was right. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and social upheaval. The evidence Thomas had gathered proved impossible to ignore. Servants came forward with stories of Marcus's cruelty. Former associates of Ashworth testified to his bribes and threats. The newspapers, sensing blood in the water, devoted page after page to the scandal, each revelation more damning than the last. In the end, Lord Ashworth was arrested on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and complicity in the murder of Cecilia Fairfax. He died before he could stand trial, a broken man whose empire had crumbled around him. Nathaniel was exonerated completely. The news spread through society like wildfire. The mysterious Duke of Rendale, long believed to be a recluse or a madman, was in fact a victim of terrible injustice. He had hidden not out of guilt, but out of necessity, protecting himself and those he loved from a powerful enemy. And now he was free. We received invitations by the dozens, balls and dinners and country house parties, all eager to welcome the Duke and his mysterious bride into their midst. Nathaniel accepted none of them. He had no interest in rejoining a society that had abandoned him so easily. But he did agree to one thing. In the summer of that year, we traveled south to visit my parents. My mother wept when she saw me. She looked healthier than she had in years, her cheeks flushed with color, her eyes bright with joy. The money Nathaniel had provided had allowed them to pay their debts, to repair the house, to live in comfort for the first time in as long as I could remember. I cannot thank you enough, she said to Nathaniel, clutching his hands. You have given us our lives back. You have given me my daughter back. Nathaniel glanced at me, and there was warmth in his eyes that made my heart skip. Your daughter gave me something far more valuable, he said. She gave me hope. She gave me a reason to stop hiding. He smiled. She saved me, Lady Hartley. I am the one who should be thanking you. We stayed for a week, and during that time, I watched Nathaniel transform. Away from the shadows of Rendale, away from the weight of his secrets, he became lighter. He laughed more easily. He walked through the gardens with my mother, discussing flowers and poetry. He sat with my father in the evenings, talking politics and history. He was becoming the man he might have been, I realized, if tragedy had not intervened. And I was falling in love with him, truly and completely, in a way I had not allowed myself to before. On our last night at my parents' estate, we walked together through the gardens as the sun set over the hills. "I have been thinking," Nathaniel said, echoing the words he had spoken on the winter solstice. "That sounds dangerous," I replied, echoing my own response. He smiled. "It is. Because I have been thinking that I do not want to go back to Rendale and pretend that nothing has changed between us. I have been thinking that I want—" He hesitated. "I want this to be real, Vivian. I want our marriage to be more than an arrangement of convenience. I want to be your husband, truly, in every way that matters." My breath caught in my throat. "What are you saying?" He stopped walking and turned to face me. The last light of the sun caught his features, illuminating the hope and the fear that warred in his expression. "I am saying that I love you," he said. "I am saying that I have loved you for longer than I realized. Perhaps from the moment you stood in that chapel and agreed to marry a monster you had never met. I am saying that you are the bravest, most stubborn, most infuriating woman I have ever known. And I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears stung my eyes. "Nathaniel, you do not have to answer," he said quickly. "I know that you did not choose this marriage. I know that I deceived you, manipulated you, treated you unfairly. I do not expect." I kissed him. I kissed him with all the emotion I had been holding back for months, all the fear and hope and longing that had built inside me since the day I first saw his true face. I kissed him until we were both breathless, until the stars began to emerge overhead, until the last of my doubts had burned away like morning mist. "I love you too," I said when we finally broke apart. "I love you, you impossible, infuriating man. I have loved you since you first called me clever, since you first looked at me as if I was something precious instead of something disposable. I have loved you, and I have been too proud or too afraid to admit it." He pulled me into his arms and held me close, and I felt his heart beating against mine, steady and strong and sure. "Then let us start again," he murmured against my hair. "Let us go back to Rendale and make it a home, not a prison. Let us fill those empty rooms with laughter and light and love. Let us be happy, Vivian. Let us be happy together." "Yes," I said, and the word was a promise, a vow, a beginning. "Yes, let us be happy." We returned to Rendale the following week, and true to his word, Nathaniel set about transforming the manor. He hired new servants, people who were not bound by the secrets of the past. He opened the locked rooms and aired out the shadows. He invited musicians and artists and scholars to visit, filling the house with conversation and creativity. He even persuaded his grandmother to smile more often, a feat I would not have believed possible. And through it all, we built our life together. The days took on a rhythm, gentle and steady, marked by small moments of joy. Morning walks across the moors, watching the heather bloom purple and wild. Afternoons in the library, reading aloud to each other from novels and poetry. Evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and hopes and fears. The nights were different. The nights were ours alone, hours of whispered words and tender touches, of passion that left us both breathless and wanting more. Nathaniel was a patient lover, attentive and generous, and in his arms, I discovered pleasures I had never known existed. I discovered what it meant to be cherished, to be desired, to be loved completely and without reservation. I had entered this marriage expecting duty. I had found instead something I had stopped believing was possible. I had found home. The autumn brought visitors. Thomas Blackwell came often, bearing news of the legal proceedings that continued to unravel Ashworth's web of corruption. The Dowager Duchess's health began to improve now that the weight of secrecy had lifted from her shoulders. Even my parents made the journey north, marveling at the beauty of the moors and the grandeur of the manor that was now my home. But it was the unexpected visitor who changed everything. She arrived on a gray October afternoon, a woman perhaps 10 years older than me, with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that held a decade of grief. Her name was Helena Fairfax. She was Cecilia's sister. I did not know she existed until she stood in our drawing room, her hands clasped tightly before her, her gaze fixed on Nathaniel with an intensity that made me reach for his arm. "I have come to apologize," she said, and her voice trembled. "I have come to tell you how sorry I am. For everything." Nathaniel went very still. "Miss Fairfax, I knew," she said. "I knew what Marcus was doing to Cecilia. She told me, begged me for help, and Her voice broke. "I told her to be patient. I told her that making accusations against a barren son would only bring scandal upon our family. I told her that if she just endured a little longer, you would return and protect her." The silence in the room was absolute. "She died because of me," Helena whispered. "She died because I was too cowardly to act. And I have carried that guilt every day since. When Lord Ashworth spread his lies, when he painted you as the villain, I wanted to speak up. I wanted to tell the truth. But I was afraid. Afraid of what he would do to me, to my family." Nathaniel crossed the room and took her hands in his. "It was not your fault," he said, and there was no anger in his voice, only a terrible, weary compassion. "You were young and frightened, and Ashworth was powerful. You did what you thought you had to do to survive. But Cecilia would not want you to carry this burden any longer." He squeezed her hands gently. "She loved you, Miss Fairfax. She spoke of you often, of how close you were, of how much you meant to her. She would want you to forgive yourself, and so do I." Helena began to weep then, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I moved to her side and put my arm around her shoulders, guiding her to a chair, offering what comfort I could. We talked for hours that afternoon. Helena shared memories of Cecilia, stories of their childhood, their hopes and dreams, their sisterly bonds. Nathaniel listened with a grief that was finally allowed to breathe, finally allowed to mourn openly the woman he had loved and lost. And somewhere in that conversation, something healed. Not completely. Some wounds never heal completely, but enough. Enough to allow hope to take root. Enough to allow the future to unfold without being strangled by the past. When Helena left the next morning, she embraced us both. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for giving me peace." She was not the only one who had found it. The winter of our first full year together was milder than the last. Snow fell gently on the moors, blanketing the world in white, but the cold seemed less bitter, the darkness less oppressive. Perhaps it was because the manor was warmer now, filled with light and laughter. Perhaps it was because I had finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or perhaps it was because of the secret I was carrying. I had suspected for weeks, but I had not been certain until the doctor confirmed it on a December morning. His face creased with a smile that told me all I needed to know. I found Nathaniel in his study, as I often did, poring over correspondence and estate business. He looked up when I entered, and his face softened into the expression that still made my heart flutter. "Vivian, is everything all right?" I crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk, a liberty I had learned to take in the months since our relationship had transformed. "Everything is perfect," I said. "In fact, everything is about to become even better." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" I took his hand and placed it on my stomach. For a moment, he simply stared at me. Then understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by wonder, followed by a joy so pure and radiant that it took my breath away. "Vivian," he whispered. Are we?" "Yes." He stood so abruptly that his chair clattered backward, and then he was kissing me, lifting me off the desk and spinning me around, laughing and crying all at once. "A child," he said when he finally set me down. our child. Our child, I confirmed. And I was crying too, tears of happiness streaming down my cheeks. Something good growing from all this pain and secrecy and sacrifice. Something beautiful. He held me close, and I felt his tears dampening my hair. I do not deserve this, he murmured. I do not deserve any of this. Perhaps not, I said, and I pulled back to look into his eyes. But you have it anyway. We have it. Together. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. The Dowager Duchess, upon hearing the news, transformed into a woman I barely recognized. She smiled constantly. She fussed over my health and comfort with an attention that bordered on obsessive. She began knitting tiny garments with a dedication that suggested she had been waiting for this moment for decades. My mother came to stay with us as my time drew near, bringing with her the warmth and practicality that I had missed so desperately. She held my hand through the difficult days, reassured me when fear crept in, reminded me that Hartley women were strong. And Nathaniel, my Nathaniel, he was everything I could have hoped for and more. He read to me when I was too tired to hold a book. He walked with me through the gardens when I needed fresh air. He held me through the nights when anxiety kept me awake, whispering words of love and reassurance into the darkness. He had been broken when I met him. We both had. But together, piece by piece, we were building something whole. My labor began on a spring evening, as the sun set over the moors in a blaze of gold and rose. It was long and difficult, hours of pain that tested every ounce of strength I possessed. But I was not alone. My mother was there, and the midwife. And through it all, Nathaniel refused to leave my side. Propriety be damned. You are doing beautifully, he told me, again and again. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. Our child is so lucky to have you as a mother. And when, at last, the cry of a newborn filled the room, I looked up through my exhaustion to see Nathaniel holding our daughter. She was perfect, pink and wrinkled and screaming with healthy lungs, a tiny miracle wrapped in white cloth. Nathaniel gazed at her with an expression of such overwhelming love that fresh tears sprang to my eyes. She has your eyes, he said, bringing her to me. I took her in my arms and felt the world reshape itself around this new center of gravity. Everything I had endured, every sacrifice, every moment of fear and doubt and longing, it had all led to this, to her, to us, to this family we had created against all odds. What shall we name her? I asked. Nathaniel sat beside me on the bed, his arm around my shoulders, his finger tracing our daughter's cheek. I thought perhaps. Eleanor, he said softly. After your grandmother, the one you told me about, who taught you to love poetry and believe in happy endings. Eleanor. The name settled over me like a blessing. Eleanor, I agreed. Eleanor Vivian Vane. Our daughter opened her eyes then, as if responding to her name, and looked up at us with a gaze that was already curious, already taking in the world. Hello, little one, Nathaniel whispered. Welcome to your family. Welcome home. The months after Eleanor's birth were a revelation in tenderness. I had not known what motherhood would feel like, had not understood how completely one small person could transform the landscape of my heart. Every moment with her was a discovery. The way her tiny fingers curled around mine, the soft sounds she made in her sleep, the weight of her in my arms, warm and trusting and utterly dependent. Nathaniel was equally enchanted. I would find him standing over her cradle in the middle of the night, simply watching her breathe. He sang to her, old lullabies from his own childhood that his mother had sung to him before her death. His voice was deeper than hers must have been, rougher around the edges, but Eleanor seemed to love it. She would grow still and quiet whenever he sang, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that spoke of some ancient recognition. He is a good father, the Dowager Duchess observed one afternoon, watching through the window as Nathaniel carried Eleanor through the garden, pointing out flowers and birds and clouds. "He is," I agreed, "better than he believes himself to be." The Dowager turned to look at me, and there was something in her expression that I had not seen before. Vulnerability, perhaps, or gratitude. "I was afraid," she admitted quietly. "When Marcus died, when Ashworth began his campaign, I was afraid that Nathaniel would never recover, that the guilt would consume him, that he would spend his entire life hiding in this house, punishing himself for sins he did not commit." Her voice wavered. "You saved him, Vivian. You gave him a reason to live again." I shook my head. "I did not save him. We saved each other." She smiled at that, the soft smile of a woman who had lived long enough to understand that the best love stories are never about rescue. They are about two people who choose, day after day, to walk together through whatever darkness or light awaits them. "Perhaps you are right," she said. "Perhaps you are both exactly what the other needed." I thought about that conversation often in the years that followed. I thought about how strange it was that the worst moment of my life, that terrible morning when my father told me I had been sold, had led me here. To this house. To this man. To this family that I loved more than I had ever imagined possible. Fate, I had learned, was not always cruel. Sometimes it was simply strange. Sometimes it led you through fire so that you could emerge, forged and tempered, into something stronger than you had been before. The years that followed were not without challenges. Society, though it had exonerated Nathaniel, was slow to fully accept him. There were whispers and sideways glances, invitations that never came, doors that remained closed. But we did not need society's approval. We had each other, and Eleanor, and the life we were building at Wrendale. The manor continued its transformation. The gardens flourished under my care, roses and lilies and lavender spilling over in profusion. The rooms filled with the sounds of a growing family, laughter echoing through hallways that had once known only silence. The Dowager Duchess lived to see Eleanor take her first steps, to hear her speak her first words. She died peacefully in her sleep on a winter night, a smile on her lips, having finally found the peace that had eluded her for so long. We mourned her deeply, but we celebrated her too, the formidable woman who had protected her family through impossible circumstances. My parents visited often, staying for months at a time. My father, mellowed by age and gratitude, became the grandfather Eleanor adored, teaching her to ride, to fish, to navigate the moors. My mother and I grew closer than we had ever been, bound by the shared experience of motherhood and the quiet understanding that we had both survived our trials. And Nathaniel. Nathaniel continued to surprise me, year after year. He remained the man I had discovered beneath the mask, complex and passionate and endlessly devoted. He challenged me and supported me and loved me in ways that made me grateful every single day for the strange twist of fate that had brought us together. On the 10th anniversary of our wedding, he took me back to the chapel where we had exchanged our vows. It was spring again, the moors blooming with wildflowers, the air sweet with the promise of renewal. The chapel looked different in the daylight, smaller and gentler, stripped of the shadows and secrets that had cloaked it on our wedding night. "Do you remember?" he asked, standing at the altar where he had once revealed his true face. "I remember," I said. "I remember being terrified. I remember being furious when you removed that mask. And now," I walked to him and took his hands, as I had done 10 years ago in very different circumstances. "Now I am grateful," I said. "Grateful for the deception that brought us together. Grateful for the courage that kept us together. Grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy we have shared. I love you, Nathaniel Vane. I love the man you were, the man you are, and the man you will become." He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you too," he murmured against my lips. More than I ever thought possible. More than I knew how to say. We stood together in the chapel as the sun streamed through the stained glass, casting colors across the ancient stones. Outside, Eleanor played in the gardens, her laughter floating on the breeze. The moors stretched wild and beautiful toward the horizon, unchanged by time, eternal as the love that had taken root in this unlikely place. I thought of the girl who had climbed into that black carriage so many years ago, the girl who had been sold for debts she did not owe, who had been prepared to sacrifice her happiness for her family's survival. She had been so young, so frightened, so certain that her life was ending. She had not known that it was only beginning. I had been forced to marry a dying man of 90. Instead, I had found a living man of 25, a man who had needed healing as desperately as I had. We had saved each other in the end. We had built a life from the ruins of our separate tragedies. And now, standing in the light of the chapel where it all began, I understood at last what my mother had meant when she told me that Hartley women do not break. We do not break. We bend. We adapt. We survive. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, we find our way to a happiness we never dared to dream of. The wind swept across the moors, carrying with it the scent of heather and hope. Nathaniel's arm tightened around me, strong and steady, a promise of all the years still to come. "Let us go home," I said. He smiled, that rare and precious smile that I had learned to cherish above all others. "Yes," he agreed. "Let us go home." And we did. Together. The story of the Duchess of Rendale became something of a legend in the years that followed. People told tales of the woman who had been sold into marriage, who had discovered her husband's deception at the altar, who had refused to be discarded. They spoke of her courage, her determination, her role in bringing a powerful criminal to justice. They whispered that she had tamed the reclusive duke, had brought light to a house that had known only darkness. The truth, as always, was more complicated than the legend. I had not tamed Nathaniel, I had simply loved him. He had not been a monster to be conquered, but a wounded man to be understood. Our story was not one of triumph over adversity, but of two broken people learning to be whole together. But I did not mind the legend. I did not mind being remembered as something more than I was. Because in the end, the legend served a purpose. It reminded other women, other girls facing impossible choices, that their stories did not have to end in tragedy. It reminded them that they were stronger than they knew, that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that there was always hope. I told Eleanor the true story when she was old enough to understand. We sat together in the garden, on a summer afternoon when the roses were in full bloom and the bees hummed lazily among the flowers. She was 18 then, on the cusp of womanhood, preparing to enter society and choose her own path. "Your father and I did not marry for love," I told her. "We married because I had no choice, and he needed something I could provide. It was an arrangement, a transaction, nothing more." "But you love each other now," she said. "You have always loved each other for as long as I can remember." "We learned to love each other," I said. "It did not happen overnight, and it was not easy. We had to choose it, every day. We had to be brave enough to trust, to forgive, to let ourselves be vulnerable." Love is not a feeling, Eleanor. Love is an action. It is a decision you make again and again, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. She was quiet for a long moment, considering my words. "I want that," she said finally, "not an arrangement, not a transaction. I want what you and Father have." I took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Then do not settle for less," I told her. "Do not let anyone tell you that you must accept a life you do not want. You are a Vane, but you are also a Hartley, and Hartley women do not break." "We do not break," she repeated, and there was steel in her voice, the same steel that had carried me through the darkest moments of my own journey. I knew then that she would be all right. Whatever challenges she faced, whatever choices lay before her, she had the strength to meet them. I had given her that much, at least. The final chapter of my story is not an ending, but a beginning. As I write these words, I am sitting in the library at Wrendale, surrounded by the books that have been my companions for nearly 20 years. The sun is setting over the moors, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and through the window I can see Nathaniel walking in the gardens with Eleanor and her young husband, a kind man who looks at her the way Nathaniel once looked at me. We are grandparents now, or we will be soon. Eleanor carries our first grandchild, and the manor buzzes with the same anticipation that filled it when I was expecting her. Life continues, generation after generation, an endless cycle of joy and sorrow and love. I am not the same woman who climbed into that black carriage so many years ago. I have been changed by time and experience, shaped by love and loss, and the simple passage of days. I am older now, my hair touched with silver, my hands no longer as steady as they once were, but I am still here, I am still standing, I am still loved. And that, I think, is the true miracle of my story. I was sold on a Tuesday morning, between my father's third glass of brandy and my mother's silence. I was told that my husband was 90 years old and dying, that I would be a nursemaid and a widow, that my life as I knew it was over. Instead, I found something I had not known I was searching for. I found a partner who challenged me and respected me and loved me with a ferocity that still takes my breath away. I found a purpose, a home, a family that extends far beyond the boundaries of blood. I found myself. And so, if you are reading these words, if you are facing your own impossible choice, your own dark carriage ride into the unknown, let me offer you this. Do not despair. Do not give up. The masks we see are not always the truth beneath. The endings we fear are not always the ones we receive. There is always hope. There is always love. And there is always the chance for a new beginning. This is my story. This is my truth. And now, it is yours. I remember, even now, the precise quality of light on that first morning at Wrendale. How it filtered through the heavy drapes like something wounded. How it painted shadows on walls that had known centuries of vain secrets. I remember the smell of beeswax candles and old books, the creak of floorboards beneath my feet, the way silence seemed to press against me from every direction like something physical. I remember being afraid, not of the house itself, though it was strange and vast and full of locked doors, not even of the marriage that awaited me, though that prospect filled me with a dread that sat heavy in my stomach. No, I was afraid of something more fundamental. I was afraid of losing myself, of becoming the ghost I was expected to be, fading into these walls until there was nothing left of Vivian Hartley at all. I did not know then that I was stronger than I believed. I did not know that strength can be forged in the fires of impossible circumstance, that courage can bloom in the darkest soil. I did not know that the man I was about to marry needed me as desperately as I would come to need him, that our broken pieces might somehow fit together to form something whole. I knew only that I had made a promise, and that Hartley women kept their promises. May you carry it with you into whatever darkness lies ahead, and may it light your way to the dawn.